Well, for those who don't know, Mitch is a camera director of photography that Forrest and I have worked with a bunch, shot wildlife all over the world, which I think people find fascinating. Like, Planet Earth, when I first watched that years ago, the coolest part was at the very end where they showed the camera guys and how they got shots.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
So, what would you say, Mitch, in your career, in your illustrious Emmy-nominated career, what is your favorite shot of an animal that you've ever gotten?
Oh, man.
That's a good question.
Favorite shot of an animal I've ever gotten.
I think I know his answer, and if he says something different, I will remind him of this.
God, that's a great question.
Well, what's coming into your mind? Just throw out a couple.
The one that immediately comes to mind is the shot of the rhino in.
Had to be. That's what I was waiting for. I was just waiting to tell the story. I was like, if he doesn't tell it, I have to bring it up. So let's go.
It's funny because the next question was, what's the closest you've come to shitting your pants when filming an animal? So you just answered both.
Those two actually are one and one. Right there. It's the same story. It's literally that rhino in Africa was, I think, because of just how close I was and the shot
Mitch,
itself.
For those that haven't seen Extinct or Alive, why don't you paint us a little picture here?
Picture. All right. So the picture is for about 3 days. Me and the camera department, we were all taking turns going out first thing in the morning to go look for rhinos with this legend, John.
Oh,
no, sorry, I wasn't talking about Forrest. I was talking about John Stevens. John Stevens,
yeah.
The legend, John Stevens. I was going out with John Stevens, the legend, and accompanied by Forrest Galante.
That's right.
But mainly John Stevens. But for multiple days, we were trying to just see a rhino
on foot in the bush, which is not something that you can do pretty much anywhere left in the world, right? You sit in a car in Kruger, you drive on the paved roads, go, there's a rhino.
Absolutely.
Like we were in deep bush Africa, tracking rhino on foot for about 3 days.
Yeah.
Please continue.
So our at the for that episode our main camera guy had gone out with Forrest, hadn't had any luck, came back. The AC had gone out, not any luck, and so finally one of the last mornings we were there, we were like, all right, Forrest is going to go in the morning. Who wants to go? And I was like, all right, well, it's my turn. I'm going. So we woke up at, I think it was 3:30 in the morning. Mm-hmm. Got everything prepped, got it ready, went out and cruised out in a safari vehicle. We ended up spotting a rhino from the road, got out, and then tracked it on foot. This went on for maybe 2-3 hours, where we just patiently walked and kind of got close to this thing. And
we had to stay downwind, and we'd hear him, and we'd approach slowly from behind a bush, and then he'd flank us to the right, so we'd move to the left so that the wind direction was with us. So we were doing a song and dance.
And is it hard to walk? Is it hard to walk quietly when your underpants are full of poo-poo?
It is, because there were multiple times where I was walking and I'd stop and hear something, and I would look at the guide what was that? And they're like, oh, that's the pack of lions tracking us. And I'm like, excuse me? What? And they're like, that's the lions that are literally, they're surrounded us. They won't attack. And I'm like, well, how do you know that? And they're like, well, they never have. And I was like, well, it still means that's not very comforting. They still could. And they're like, they're 100 meters away. And I'm like, that's like a football field. That's not that far. But it was one of those things where, whatever, we're on foot, it's not that I felt safe, but I felt I have Forrest there who I trust. I have the guides there that I trust. I was like, all right, whatever. Let's go on foot. Let's track this thing. So we go charging into the bush. We're quietly sneaking up on this rhino who constantly is moving his way away from us. And finally, after, maybe an hour, 2 hours, we finally get to a position where, I can get a shot where I see Forrest and the rhino together, which is that's the dream shot in any wildlife show. If you can get a host and the animal in the same shot, that's
and I think for a second,
sure.
Go ahead, Patrick.
I was going to say, and why is that?
It's because you can't fake that, right? There's no argument of, I could just use a stock footage shot of a rhino and a shot of Forrest and oh my God, look, there it is. The minute you get that shot, and not that we ever do that, but
people do.
People do.
It's a big thing.
It happens.
And I do want to say this Sorry, Mitch, I just want to interrupt and say one thing about that.
Good.
To Mitch's credit, which I really, in fact, I'd rather you stop listening for a second. For all those people that have, watched Planet Earth or Blue Planet or whatever, you have these incredible shots of animals, right? Try and do that while also putting the host in the frame. It's incredibly challenging what Mitch has to do. And especially when your host is me, who's, all hopped up on Mountain Dew, jumping around like a lunatic.
Yeah, baby. Best drink ever.
Yeah, so it's, I credit to Mitch because his one of his main things is always connecting me with these oftentimes extinct animals, but wild creatures that we're out tracking. And in this case, he's trying to get a shot of me talking about this rhino. And in doing so, what happened, Mitch?
Like you said, it's for the purposes of our show, like if you can't get you and an animal together, it's just not as good. So we're constantly trying to connect Forrest to an animal. So in this circumstance, we were tracking this rhino, going through the woods. 2 hours later, I finally get to a position where it's like I've got Forrest on one side of my frame, and I got the rhino in the background, and I'm like, oh, this is it. And Forrest is looking at the camera, talking about the rhino, and it's like this great epic moment. And we're all like, oh, this is... And right after he was done, Forrest was done with his whole presentation, talked about the rhino, did everything. It was like I had such this relief of like, wow, I got it, right? But right after that, one of our trackers was like, oh my God, Mitch, there's a better shot like 10 feet this way. So I'm like, oh, great. So I like changed lenses quick, move over, and I was standing between these two trees, and I like got crouched down, got this, distant shot of a rhino. Well, this rhino...
And let me just say this quickly, because you're about to explain why, or you're about to explain what happened, but what happened is when Mitch shifted and we moved, either we went upwind of it a little bit, or the wind changed, and then what happened, Mitch?
Right, so I'm standing between two tiny, like, when I say trees, I don't mean trees, they're like twigs. Sticks. They're like these little sticks. I'm standing between these sticks, knelt down, and this rhino just starts walking in. He just starts walking toward me, and I'm filming, and I'm, I have my eye through the lens, so I'm like, oh, this looks great. Look at this amazing shot. And he's just
keeping
closer
it in
and closer.
Focus, not thinking about what's happening.
As I'm like, racking out, and I'm like, kind of like, I know I had a, for you camera nerds out there, I had a 70 to 200 lens, so I like was at 200, and as he gets closer, I'm like backing out, and all of a sudden I'm at the end of my lens. I'm like, holy shit, he's really close, and I'm in focus, and I look up, and the thing is like 15 feet away, and I was like, oh my God, what have I done? And then the thing, at that point, I just sort of froze, and I was just like, fuck, like at this point, like, what do I do? Like, he's 15 feet away, he's looking right at me. It would take him maybe a split second to get from him to me. Like,
you looked up at me, remember, and I whispered to you.
What did you whisper? What did you whisper?
So in my head, I remember thinking, and it's all very clear because it's a moment in my life where I actually feel like I had perfect clarity, but I remember thinking, and this honestly, like, not that I want to fucking, pat Forrest on the back by any means, but this is something that like Forrest has always kind of instilled in all of his camera crew is, when if you're close with any animal, just act normal, just don't freak out, just be calm.
Yeah, but you kind of got to have no amygdala like Forrest does to do that. So I don't expect that you did that.
Freaking out is not going to help anyone. It's going to get yourself killed. So
he looks up at me.
He looks up. He sees Forrest and everybody. He looks back at me. I'm the closest, and I'm just like, God damn it, this is it. I'm screwed.
Yeah.
And I just completely froze, just rock solid. And he looks at me, and he kind of does this whole like. He gets all tense.
Or the rhino.
The rhino. So he gets all tense, and he's like looking at me. He does this whole foot thing, and he's just like ready. And I'm like, this is it. I'm like, this is it. This is it.
Starting to get ready to charge, right? So he kicks up dust. He does out his nostrils. He's locked onto Mitch in the scent. Yeah. Now, rhinos, for those that don't know, they have terrible vision, right? They're really, really poor eyesight, but they feel incredibly nervous if they can smell a threat, and they will charge. Without any question, they will charge. So what happened was Mitch is behind these twigs. I'm just to his right behind, a slightly larger stick that I could maybe have pulled myself up in an emergency. And the rhino looks over, and it goes, basically the rhino's thinking, there's something there. I can see a shape through the bushes. I don't know what it is. I can smell it. it's 15 feet away. I'm going to kill it. So right? That's what's going through the rhino's mind. Mm-hmm. And Mitch is locked on 15 feet away, eyeball to eyeball with this thing. He looks up at me, and what did I say to you, Mitch?
It was early. You said anything. It was just everybody was just mouthing, "Don't move,
don't move." Like, yeah, right.
Why? Because it would immediately just charge his ass if he.
Absolutely,
100%.
Absolutely,
100%. Zero question about it.
So easier said than done
at all.
Yeah,
easier said than done, for sure.
When you're 15 feet from a 3,000-pound animal, right? That has a 12
notoriously bad temper.
Yeah, bad temper.
It's got
for 3 hours. It's perfectly built for killing lions.
For just running straight at something and killing it.
And you're the only thing it's thinking about.
Yeah, that's exactly what was going on.
It's also exactly the moment that you pooped your pants. So
that was basically.
So he looks so this rhino's staring at Mitch. They're in a lock off. Mitch looks up at me. He's right. I don't think I said anything. I just mouthed, "Don't move."
Yeah.
And Mitch just looked literally just turned his head back to the rhino, so he was watching. And I could feel what Mitch was thinking. Because, by the way, I was terrified. Not for Mitch. I was terrified for myself. I've never been 15 feet away from a wild rhino before, and I was 22 feet away. And Mitch was closer. This was probably the most tense moment we've ever had on the show with an animal.
Yeah.
And
it was
lasted
scary, for sure.
It lasted just under a minute, I'd say.
Yeah, about a minute. I would say about a minute.
About a minute.
From the minute it stopped right in front of me to where it finally. It was about a minute, but that minute was. It was the longest minute of my life.
God. Oh my god! It felt like an hour and a half.
It was. But I can definitely say there was a moment when I looked at Forrest and he said don't move, and then at one point I looked over at the other. Behind the tree, to my left, there was one of our other guides was kind of looking at me just doing that, just and I'm it's finally I was just all right, screw it, I'm in this situation, let's just I almost had a point where I was let's just embrace it. So I looked back at the rhino and I just kind of locked eyes, and it wasn't, I don't know, some people believe in universal feelings and whatever. Karma.
Yeah.
I had a moment where I looked back at the rhino and I was just I'm not here to hurt you. I'm just photographing. Please spare me. I had that moment with the rhino, and the rhino just kind of looked at me, and then he kind of would look back at Forrest and them, who were kind of tucked behind a tree, and then he'd look back at me, and there was a couple moments where he kind of moved forward, and I was oh, this is it, and then he kind of stopped. And then after, Forrest said about a minute, he just sort of was all right.
Kicked his head up, and just turned and charged off into the bush.
Completely, his whole demeanor changed. He calmed down, and he just sort of was all right, I'm good. And he kind of turned and walked away. And I, not to, brag, but, up until right when he walked away, I was pretty good. I held this, stone cold face. I was all right, this is the situation I'm in. Keep calm, don't react, don't freak out. That's just going to set it off. So I just kind of accepted what I was in. Everything was fine. And the minute he left, I went from being I'm totally fine.
You were
I'm chill. The minute he left, I literally collapsed and I almost couldn't breathe. I was
shaking. I've never seen so much.
It was terrifying. The
minute he left, guys, the minute the rhino turned and charged off, because the rhino trotted off at a pretty good pace. We kind of erupted into a laughter of relief and looked at Mitch, and he was lying in the ground convulsing with adrenaline. I'm not just saying that to be dramatic. He was shaking. His hands were just like this. He was convulsing with adrenaline, and it was awesome because. We've all in our lives we'll probably all be faced with some kind of situation like that, and there's two response, not with a rhino, but with some kind of situation where the fight or flight response will be triggered, right? And Mitchell stood his ground. He did not flee. He did not. If he had done that, I think not only would he have been killed, but the odds of many people being very injured in the situation would have been astronomical. That rhino would have just gone bonkers. And Mitch held his cool, and the second that rhino left, he just broke down with that adrenaline rush. And it was honestly, the whole thing was just an incredible moment.